I find when recording sermons, it's always best to press record instead of play. It gets a bit confusing when someone else's voice comes out. The reading today, to me, is quite challenging. Difficult to hear, maybe. But it's a true story. Often when we stand up here and we talk about things, whatever the theme is, whatever the subject is for the day, we almost sugarcoat things so that we don't upset people. But sometimes we have to deal with difficult things, difficult issues, challenging thoughts or ideas. And this is an incredible story. But we will come back to that. You knew that was coming. For now, I want to look back at Lent. This is the 5th and last Sunday of Lent, the last in our theme of discipleship. So, in true TV style, we're going to have a flashback. Have the first slide. Yep. Oh, it's there. First Sunday of Lent, we had Be Bold. When we saw a video about changing passion into action, standing up, taking something that we're passionate about, and actually doing something about it, rather than just sitting at home talking about it. On the second Sunday, we had Be Yourself, when we heard from Rev Catherine Dearlove about the importance of being who God made us to be, not who we think other people want us to be. On the third Sunday was Be Just, when we saw the video of the events in Selma, Alabama, on that Sunday when things got out of hand and ordinary, normal, decent people started beating people. On the fourth Sunday in Lent was Be Generous, where we heard from Sarah Barber, who spoke to us about being generous of thought and spirit, because it's not all about money. Which brings us finally to today and the 5th Sunday of Lent, which is Be Steadfast. The whole of this Lent, our theme has been about discipleship, which is defined as following the teachings or wisdom of another. When we use the word disciple, we tend to think of the guys who travelled with Christ, who followed him everywhere. And we give it a holy, special, spiritual, up there kind of meaning. But to my mind, we all follow the teachings of others. When we're young, we follow the teachings of our parents, maybe school teachers, although not so much in my case. And people we see and admire, the David Beckhams of the world. I mean, you can't see Beckham without a whole bunch of people copying his haircut, doing his same moves, etc. So we are all disciples in some form or other. And do we need all these attributes to be a disciple? The boldness, self-belief, justice, generosity and steadfastness? Probably not. But I would suggest that they are aspects of being a committed disciple. But it's by no means an exhaustive list. I was asked the other day, what makes me a Christian? And this had a follow-up question before I even had a chance to answer, which was, how do I see Christ? Tricky questions, to be sure. But my answers were actually quite easy, being a simple chap that I am. I believe that following the teachings and example of Jesus Christ makes me a Christian. I mean, that's what the word Christian means, isn't it? A follower of Christ. So to me, it's as simple as that. I follow Christ, so I am a Christian. It's a simplistic answer, but that is how I see things. How I see Christ is a bit more personal. But the best way I could describe it at the time was that I saw him as an older brother. Not the one that's always in trouble, getting drunk and locked up, etc. But the one that's kind of got his life together and you look up to and you aspire to be like. And it's the kind of the older brother where you look up and you think, oh, I want to be more like him. I want to do that. I want to do that. And it's an example you can follow and an ideal that you may want to live up to. So in a way, I see Christ as family. After all, he is a child of God. And I believe, personally, that we are all children of God. So that makes us all part of a very large family. We don't always agree, We might argue, and occasionally we do fight. But in the end, when it comes down to it, we are family, and that counts for a lot. So today it is be steadfast. And another great definition for you. Steadfast means to be firm in purpose, constant and unwavering. Which brings us to St. Maximilian Kolbe. Maximilian was originally a missionary. He travelled around doing good works in various places. And he went to Japan, which is where he became really ill. And so he returned home to Poland. And then he studied theology. Eventually, he became a Franciscan father. And that is not easy to say. Now, when I think of Franciscans, I think of those blokes in brown robes, with the sort of tonsured hair, and they're wandering up and down the street, occasionally chanting. But the Franciscan order is actually quite widespread, and there are different sorts. However, it's a mendicant order, which is a great word. I love that word. Which means they live wholly on charity. They live on other people's charity, because they believe that's how Christ lived, so that's how they should live. Father Kolbe, as he had become, followed the Franciscan way, and always gave freely of his time and of himself. He seems to me to epitomise the word steadfast. He was constant, he was unwavering in his faith and in his actions. I'm not going to go into too much detail about his life, but it is quite an interesting one, and so I can recommend looking it up and reading about him. He was a very clever man. He will, of course, always be remembered for the act that we heard in the reading today. The act that ended up with him being canonised and made Saint Maximilian Kolbe. However, that was the culmination of a life in faith, not the whole of it. That was not the total of him. That was just the end of a long life in faith. That day in the concentration camp, he stepped forward and offered himself with such conviction that the guards changed their minds and allowed him to take the other man's place. Now you may think, what does it matter, one person or another? But back then it was all about power, and once they'd chosen people to be killed, those were the people they took, irrespective of what their family said or offered. But he stepped forward with such conviction, the guards allowed him to take his place. Maximilian knew what the punishment was going to be. They all did. That they would suffer starvation, which is a slow and agonising death. But still, he stepped forward. We heard part of the homily from Pope John Paul II. And he said of him that he truly represented Christ in the world. He called him the patron saint of our difficult century, which is such a fantastic phrase. Imagine if that's what you left the world with, the patron saint of our difficult century. He is also held to be the patron saint of drug addicts, political prisoners, families, which is an unusual one to see in there, journalists, prisoners, and even the pro-life movement. He was canonised, as we heard, in 1982, and declared to be a martyr of charity, which is an unusual phrase. But when I think about it, I just wonder, and I don't know, could I be that steadfast? Could I be that firm in purpose, that constant and unwavering? I'm not sure. I don't think any of us will ever know what we are capable of until that moment arrives. We have heard before how a split-second decision made in the heat of the moment can have huge consequences. In Selma, there was a split-second decision when the troopers started walking forwards. They didn't have to start pushing people, they didn't have to start people running, and they certainly didn't have to beat them half to death. But in that split second, someone said, move them on. And that decision had huge impact. So a simple decision made in that one moment can have great impact for good or for bad. After all, I would imagine that there is not a single person, or there was not a single person in that entire camp, both guards and prisoners, who witnessed what he did that day, they weren't changed by it. They weren't affected by it. I mean, who knows what the long-term impact of that decision, that moment is. I mean, I would like to think the guards went away and with a new respect for the people that they were guarding. And maybe it even changed some of their lives. And that amongst those prisoners, they had their eyes opened to the true power of faith. So, discipleship. I, for one, think it is one of the most powerful expressions of faith there is. And I pray every day that I can be bold, be just, be generous, be steadfast. But most of all, be all of these things by being myself. I have the last slide. Thank you.